Okay, so we have a surprising situation that we have no questions other than I had a backup question of my own. So we'll start with that, and hopefully people come up with some other questions in the meantime. So let me get it here. So this you've mentioned this several times in the past, but just a few weeks ago you said it again, that basically that only bhakti requires shraddha alone, whereas gyan and yoga, they like require more than that. There's these preliminary things that you need for yoga and gyan. But I was thinking about it, like, isn't it also that, like, you think about Ashtanga yoga, for example, so like yama and niyama, that's part of the Ashtanga yoga process. So couldn't you say that, like, you are doing yoga already when you're doing the preliminary things, just like in bhakti, like you're not doing Shuddha bhakti, but you're doing these kind of like bhakti-like activities that purify your heart, and then you become like eventually like a Shuddha bhakta. So what is the actual difference between bhakti and jnana and yoga in that way?
Well, if I understand your question correctly, I think that there is a difference between having faith, for example, in the efficacy of bhakti, and as a result of that, taking up the chanting of the holy name. And having faith in yoga, for example, Ashtanga yoga, but in order to practice it, having to embrace brahmacharya. So there are yamas and niyamas, do's and don'ts, a moral kind of basis out of which the successive stages of Ashtanga, Eightfold Yoga, Mystic Yoga evolve, yama niyama. But I think that you have to embrace those, classically speaking, in order to move on to asana, pranayam, pratyahara, dharana, dhyan, and enter samadhi. Whereas in bhakti, there are angas of bhakti, limbs of bhakti, but one's practice of bhakti does not depend upon embracing all of the angas of bhakti. One could embrace just, for example, the anga of kirtan, and just for faith. And obviously there's other things that you can do and whatnot as well, that prior to taking up bhakti make you more disposed towards bhakti. Or if you were a jnani previously, your heart may be already cleansed, and then you develop faith in bhakti. But I'm not sure if that's part of your question, but I think there's a difference. You don't have to embrace all the angas of bhakti. There are many. They pertain to the body, the mind, the words. You could embrace just one. And the one that's emphasized, of course, primarily in our time is Nam Kirtan. So just for the price of faith, you take up if you have faith in the efficacy of the name, you take up the chanting, and it qualifies you in every other way. So that's different than having to embrace the yamas and niyamas. And I'm not sure how it works exactly with Gyan, but I think the point also, both with regard to Gyan and yoga, is that they are contemplative paths. So they begin as contemplative paths. So you have to be a contemplative to take them up. Obviously, there may be degrees of what it means to be a contemplative, but the yoga path is about sitting and meditating. And it's clear from the Bhagavad Gita, for example, which is a classic text, certainly worthy of referring to, that prior to Gyan and prior to the Dhyan, or the meditation of Ashtanga Yoga, there are other practices that are required in order that your heart become purified enough that you can sit down and you can be a contemplative. Therefore, Krishna emphasizes following the Dharma, on the karma marg, or really what he emphasizes there in the Gita to Arjuna is to go to the next step, to nishkam karma. You have this momentum in which you're moving in the world since time immemorial and in your human life according to karma. So do nishkam karma. Follow the injunctions of the scriptures that are religious, that pertain to your nature and so forth, but do them without attachment to the results, which is what everybody does them for the result. Do them without attachment to the results, but just because they should be done. This is called nishkam karma, right? And this gradually purifies one to sit and be a contemplative. Krishna very much argues against entering into contemplative life without first undergoing this kind of prerequisite. Otherwise, it becomes, he says, mityachara uchate, it becomes a sham. Because if the heart isn't purified sufficiently, one can't sit, and one's mind will actually be somewhere else, and that will be a kind of a cheating, if you will. So they are contemplative paths. Now, bhakti is ultimately a contemplative path also, but it has an active as well as a contemplative side. It has its active side and it has its emotive side. It's another way to put it. When you enter into bhava bhakti, then the emotive side of bhakti kicks in. Prior to that, the active side of bhakti is there. From active engagement in things like kirtan, like serving the deity, for example, which requires, which engages all of the senses, growing things, food for the deity, preparing it, weeding the garden, cooking it, offering it, so on and so forth. From this step of active arjan, one is purified. Similarly, from active, if you will, an external kirtan, one is purified and one can enter into contemplative life. But the point being, both sides are there in bhakti. They're not there in Gyan and yoga, which are exclusively contemplative paths. So there's some pre-qualification for contemplative life, and we acknowledge that within bhakti. But bhakti allows one to participate prior to being really qualified in all respects for contemplative life. And what is the qualification? Simply the faith of in the efficacy, for example, of Nam. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, partially, but I'm still thinking, like, isn't it then the case that there's basically like an unripe stage of bhakti that is not actually bhakti proper in a lot of ways, and then there's the ripe stage, which is actually contemplative kind of like orientation. So I'm thinking, like, the same way like a yogi could practice becoming a contemplative, that's like the preliminary unripe stage of yoga. So I guess I can't see, like, why is it different with bhakti, because we're not like real devotees in the stage when the bhakti is unripe, right? Or yeah, anyway, I guess that's my doubt.
Well, according to the Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu, there are three stages of bhakti. All are considered bhakti, and all are considered bhaktas who participate in them: sadhana bhakti, bhava bhakti, and prem bhakti. So I don't think you have that type of distinction within Gyan and within yoga. And again, I refer you to the Gita, or to go to the Yoga Sutra. What is the qualification for taking up yoga? That's not just faith. and taking up gyan, which requires a purified heart to a certain, at least to a certain point. What you're saying is, well, couldn't we try? What's going to purify the heart? Is the trying in the practice of gyan and yoga, whatever that would be, have the efficacy to purify the heart, as does, for example, nishkam karma, or as does bhakti, which is, again, to make another point, nirguna, rather than something that's governed by sattva guna, as the case is with gyan and yoga.
Yeah, no, that makes perfect sense. I'll think about it a little more. I'll get back to it at some point. So we do have another question from Shraddha from Canada. She says here, okay, I have been increasingly inspired by the worship of Lord Nityananda Prabhu. This started when I had a darshan of Lord Nitai's shoes in 2015 when they were brought from a temple in Mayapur on a tour. My heart tells me to build on these feelings by adding a song to my sadhana. It touched me to hear that Srila Bhakti Rakshak Sridhar Maharaj would sing to himself the song Dayal Nitai Re like a mantra. I heard that worshiping an exalted personality such as Lord Nityananda and adoring the tattva manifested through that personality are one and the same. Am I on the right path by adding the song Nitai Pada Kamala, and is it proper to share these feelings of the heart to everyone? I feel that to not do anything would be a waste of a heart, so to speak.
Well, you're doing the right thing. That's very beautiful. And I would refer you to, with regard to the kind of the last part of your question, the 5th chapter of Caitanya Charitamrita in the Adi Lila. Towards the end of that chapter is about Nityananda Prabhu, the ontological position of Nityananda Prabhu, explained by Krishna's Kaviraj Goswami. Towards the very end of the chapter, he segues into a personal experience, and the text turns confessional, where Krishna's Kaviraj Goswami says, there's something that I shouldn't talk about, but if I don't talk about it, then people won't really understand or appreciate the glory of Nityananda Prabhu. So therefore, I'm going to talk about it. Because typically internal experiences are something that we keep to ourselves. We discuss them with our guru and so forth. So that, well, you don't want to use a biblical term, phrase. You don't want to throw pearls before a swine. People who can't appreciate you don't want to tell them such things. And you don't want to speak about your internal experiences in a way that might cause pride to come within you either. So it's recommended that those things be kept internal. They can be discussed perhaps with contemporaries, or certainly with your guru. But here he says, if I don't tell this, then the world won't know his glory. And he begins to tell a story of how Nityananda Prabhu came into his life personally in a dream and sent him to Vrindavan. And this as a result of him leaving home, because he found that in his home, the home of his brother where he was living, Nityananda Prabhu was not understood and not respected, whereas Caitanya Mahaprabhu was. And he considered that if you accept Caitanya Mahaprabhu, but you don't accept Nityananda Prabhu, it's like what's called the half-hen logic. The man had a chicken, and he thought that by selling the eggs of this chicken, I'm making a good profit. So from one hole in the chicken comes eggs, but there's another hole that I have to put money into in the form of the mouth. So one hole is costing me money and one hole is making me money. I'll cut the head off the chicken, and then I won't have to spend any money. So then you have nothing. So he compared the glorification of Caitanya Mahaprabhu that at the same time constituted a disrespect for Nityananda Prabhu, to be uh, uh, like that, half-end logic. So you got nothing. Chaitanya Mahaprabhu repeatedly went out of his way to emphasize to his disciples the importance of Nityananda Prabhu. You find this in the Bhagavatam also, when the Paganda lila of Krishna begins in the 15th chapter of the 10th canto, which is a time, the boyhood of Krishna, which Balarama becomes prominent. That section begins with a eulogy on the part of Krishna, a eulogy of Balaram, glorifying Balaram. So he wants to make clear what is the position of Balaram, Nityananda and Balaram, of course, being the same person, appearing for different leelas. So, so it's very, very nice idea. Very, very nice that such feelings, thoughts come to you, and they should be nourished and cultured. There are the songs also. There are a number of nice songs by Bhakti Vinod about Nityananda Prabhu. You've chosen the song of Narottam Thakur, Nitai Pada Kamala, Koti Chandra Shushita. That's a very famous one. There are many of them, so you can incorporate any number of them, save and except there is a sector of devotees who have composed some poetry that speaks about Nityananda in ways that depart from how the Goswamis have and Krishnadas Kaviraj, Vrindavan Das Thakur have explained the ontological position of Nityananda Prabhu. He is in sakhya-rasa, and he's not in Madhurya Rasa. So some have tried to construe him in that way. That kind of poetry should be avoided. But you won't find that in the writings of Narottam Thakur or Bhakti Vinod Thakur, whose songs are most prominently embraced in our lineage. And of course, it's worth noting, although it's something that's been said many times. Ujjapad Sridhar Maharaj gave a very beautiful analysis of how Prabhupada was, his campaign was analogous to that of Nityananda Prabhu, and indicated that he had been empowered particularly by Nitai Chand for his work. So we're very put our head at the feet of Nityananda Prabhu, and we know we'll have a place in Krishna Lila without a doubt, and we'll also have a place at the feet of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. So I encourage you to continue that. Very, very, very nice to hear that. I'm very pleased. Nitai Chand Ki Jai.
Thank you. Thank you for that.
So,
Nitai Chaitanya Bole, Nachreya Marmon, Nachreya Marmon, Nachreya Marmon. Nitai Chaitanya Bole, Nachreya Marmon. Haribo, Nitai Chand Ki Jai.
Harijan had a follow-up question on this one.
Dandas Pranam, Guru Maharaj.
Haribo.
Hare Krishna. So I have a question.
I can't hear you.
I'm not audible now, or
Guru Maharaj, did you do the English and mute original?
maybe I did
I
not.
did that, yes. Let me look again.
Maybe
English.
now.
Now I can hear you.
Sorry about that. So I have a question regarding Balaram Tattva. Like,
Yes.
like in Brahma-vimohan lila, there is mentioned there are those svamsa-expansions, and it says that Krishna prefers he prefers relationship with these original boys than with his expansion. So my question is like, what's the difference between like Balaram and these svamsa-expansions? We cannot say that he don't prefer a relationship with Balaram, or so what's the difference there?
Excuse me. Yeah. It's thought that Krishna manifested himself as all of the cowherd boys and calves in the Brahma-vimohan lila. But because they are the object of love himself, rather than devotees, if you will, which are the shelter of that love, it inhibited his capacity to taste rasa because he was interacting with himself. So your question is, well, isn't Balaram himself also? And there's no difficulty there. Well, Balaram's a special expansion, if you will, of Krishna for a specific purpose and pastimes. And he is interesting, theologically speaking, in that while he is the object of love, which is the point you're making, which should be a problem for Krishna to interact with him and taste rasa, because Krishna is the object of love and he's the object of love. Whereas for there to be rasa, you need the object of love and you need the shelter or the personification of that love. Right? This is your point. But Balaram's specialty, theologically speaking, is that he is both Bhagwan, but in the mood of a servitor of Bhagwan. He's emotional. What makes him a Vaibhava Prakash, which means he's different in emotional content from Krishna, is that he has the emotions of a devotee primarily. So we look at him in that light. That's why sometimes in some sampradayas they think he's a devotee. He's not Bhagwan, because that aspect of him, his emotional content and being, is what shines out. There are instances in the lila, for example, midday when Krishna goes to Radhakund with some of his intimate friends and the other friends stay with Balaram, where he takes more overtly the role of being the object of love, but primarily in all the leelas in Vrindavan with Krishna, he is in the emotion of a devotee. He's said to be the very root of the emotion of devotion of the abhiman or the ego of a devotee in all devotees. So while he is Bhagwan and the object of love, he is also an example of that love, and that feature is prominent in him. So that's his emotional content. Now you could ask, well, couldn't Krishna manifest all the cowherd boys and keep them in that, emotion and so forth? Well, there would be a problem with that. If he were to manifest himself as all the cowherd boys, and those cowherd boys were to have the emotions of devotees in such a way that it would facilitate Krishna's interaction with them, and as such, there wouldn't be any difference between that interaction with them and the original boys themselves. What would be the problem with that? The problem with that is that if they were not prominently in the problem with that is that for Vatsalya Rasa, this Brahma-vimohan lila is for sakhya-rasa and Vatsalya Rasa. For Vatsalya Rasa, the devotees in Vatsalya Rasa have the opportunity to interact with Krishna personally, or the cows with the calves personally, with their sons and their calves being the perfect object of love. So that's preserved in that sense, that they might have that full experience. And in the Prakat Lila, when devotees enter into the Prakat Lila through sakhya-rasa, then it's during the Brahma-vimohan Lila that they are able to reach the full pinnacle of sakhya-rasa and fully qualify themselves to go to the Aprakat Lila in association with other devotees in sakhya-rasa and having Krishna as their son. So they're having a direct experience that Krishna is their son, and therefore their bhakti is for their sons is increasing. Of course, they love Krishna still even more at the same time because he has more beauty than all of the boys at the same time. So it's preserved his position as the personality of God. It is preserved to some extent, which isn't the case with Balaram. In fact, the opposite is the case. The emphasis there is on his emotion as a devotee and his example as Sakha, as a friend of Krishna. Does that help? So yeah, the argument's made. They're all swamsa. They're not the binamsa, or they're all the vishaya rather than the ashraya. So it's a problem. How much it's a problem? Well, that's a theological nuance. But yeah, the comments do come along those lines. That in some ways it constitutes a shortcoming for Krishna in comparison to the original boys. Does that help?
Yes, thank you, Guru Maharaj.
Okay. Hare Krishna.
Next question is from Amrit Gopal from Brighton.
Yes.
Hare Krishna devotees, Hare Krishna Maharaj.
I can't hear you.
Can you hear me now?
No, we're not.
No.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Krishna. Maharaj, a pastime from the Madhya Lila. Gauranga Mahaprabhu manifests some anger when a Bengali Brahmin drinks his the water that has washed his lotus feet during the cleansing of the Gundica-marjana. Why does Mahaprabhu manifest anger, and then why is that anger apparent?
Well, Chaitanya Mahaprabhu manifests anger, or he shows that he's upset, let us say, with the devotee who worships him and drinks the water from that has bathed his feet, because he is setting an example as a devotee, and the last thing that the devotee wants is to be served. He or she wants to serve, and wants that all the service will be rendered to Bhagwan. He doesn't think that the water from his feet that is, you typically, the sannyasi would walk barefoot, and so to go in the temple, you bathe your feet, and so it's an example of the humility of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, setting an example for us as devotees. I think that internally he's pleased, externally he's upset. It was appropriate for that devotee to worship in that way, but this is the bhava of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. He's in the bhava of a devotee, so sometimes that bhava of a devotee will become prominent, and he'll react in ways that he would expect other devotees to react as well. When people would call out, Vishnu, Vishnu, or you are Krishna, he would often cover his ears and think, what are they saying, and so forth. So it's another example of that. So I think that he's setting an example for other devotees on the one hand. On the other hand, it's unconscious on his part. He is absorbed in the mood of being just a simple devotee of Bhagavan. And however great the devotees are, Bhagavan is greater. Of course, he thinks differently. Bhagavan thinks the devotees are greater, but and he tells us to think like that as well. But the only reason we do it is because he tells us. So he's great, and we're small. However big we are, we're small. And so Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, we say he's playing the role of a devotee, but he's really in the bhav of a devotee, and a devotee reacts like this. No, don't worship me. Now, there may be instances where, for the sake of service, officially a devotee has to accept worship. Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur lectured on this when he sat on the Vyasasan, and on the day of his appearance day, they celebrated it, and he gave a famous lecture entitled "More Humble Than a Blade of Grass." He said, "This is the mandate from Chaitanya Charitamrita, and you may wonder what kind of humility is this? I'm sitting here accepting garlands and praise from everybody and so forth." But then he gave a dynamic explanation of humility before Guru and Krishna. If the Guru asks you to do this, then you have to accept such and so forth. But this is the natural disposition of devotee. And as I say, Chaitanya Mahaprabhu is not just playing the role of a devotee, he's actually in the bhav of a devotee. And so someone is worshiping him, drinking the water from his feet. He's thinking, what is this? This is inappropriate. So he showed he was a little upset with that, but still it was right for the devotee to do so at the same time. Does that help?
In terms of his antaranga bhav, feeling the pleasure, actually manifesting anger, but then internally feeling pleased. I'd love to hear a little bit more about that too.
Well, there are instances in which Chaitanya Mahaprabhu expresses disappointment, or he's upset externally, but internally it's more clear that internally he's also aware that of what the devotee is doing and why, and accepting it and so forth. I can't think of one offhand, but I know there are a number of them where it's more clear that internally he's pleased, while showing external dissatisfaction. In this particular instance, it's not as clear, but we take it for granted that how could he not be pleased? He is Bhagavan. That's a fact. He's hiding from us, and this devotee is bringing it out, and in doing so, the actual mission of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, in one sense, as a devotee, was to distribute bhakti, also, right? To taste bhakti in the highest sense, and distribute it. So, for the distribution of bhakti, it's required that we understand that Chaitanya Mahaprabhu is Bhagavan, and his devotees showing that, so that we can intuit that he's pleased by that. That's part of his mission. There's a way that you can argue at certain instances. Well, Chaitanya Mahaprabhu is in this particular bhava, we should worship him according to how he is in the bhava, and not worship him, which he's worthy of, in ways that contradict the bhava. But the example of that is something more along the lines of Vrindavan Das Thakur's how would you say it, objection to the idea that, well, Chaitanya Mahaprabhu is Krishna. He's not an avatar of Krishna, he's Krishna himself. Krishna is Rasaraj. As Rasaraj means he accepts worship in all the rasas. Therefore, we can worship Chaitanya Mahaprabhu in all the rasas. Therefore, we can become um, romantic lovers of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, as there are romantic lovers of Krishna. Well, Vrindavan Das objects to this and says, it's true that he's Rasaraj, it's true that he's Krishna, but he's in a particular mood. The mood that he's in primarily is that he's trying to taste the bhava of the gopis. So we should honor the bhava that he's in, and not try to worship him in a way that contradicts the bhava. If he's trying to taste what it means to be a gopi, and we try to worship him as as if we are gopis and he is Krishna, this is contradicting the whole purpose of his descent. So that's an extreme form in which we take exception to that idea. So from our perspective, and that of Vrindavan Das Thakur, Krishnadas Kaviraj Goswami, the Vrindavan Goswamis, and so forth, that would be objectionable to take Chaitanya Mahaprabhu outwardly and internally. But otherwise, these smaller instances in which devotees are pointing out that he's God, and breaking the veil of his being a devotee, and he rejects, we can do it if it's not clear from the text itself that he's internally pleased with that. Chaitanya Mahaprabhu ki jai.
Yay.
Haribol.
Next question is from Mohini.
Okay.
It's not my question. A girl in our community, Devanshi, sent me this question this week, and I wasn't sure the answer. She asks, I was wondering, in some temples such as Banka Bihari and Radharaman temple, there is Krishna deity, but only Radharani's crown next to him. Do you know why this is so, that there is a crown instead of a deity?
Banka Bihari temple is not a temple that's in the Gaudiya line, so I'm not familiar with all the details. It's a very famous temple, of course, and but the Banka Bihari temple is not our line. As far as the Radharaman temple, of course, that is in our line, and there are different ways to think about that. But one of the ways is that Gopal Bhatta Goswami, to whom Radharaman appeared, was told by Chaitanya Mahaprabhu that he should, when they met in South India, that he should take care of his parents and then go to Vrindavan, and that he would meet him again there. But Chaitanya Mahaprabhu never physically came there again. However, he sent his seat, a wooden seat, and his cloth to Gopal Bhatta Goswami. And this was taken to mean, in one sense, that the seat should be given to Gopal Bhatta Goswami. He was a South Indian Brahmin, and he was in the best position amongst the Goswamis to serve in the capacity of a guru, because given the climate of the times, in which in Varnashram, the Brahmins are all gurus in the Varnashram system. So this is not the Varnashram system, but the Goswamis were preaching. They had to kind of work with the sensibilities of the time and so forth. And Rupa and Sanatan, they had been ostracized from the Hindu community in many respects. So it was thought that Gopal Bhatta Goswami was in a better position to officially take that status. So the seat was indicative of that. They sent the seat to him. But aside from Chaitanya Mahaprabhu coming there in the form of his seat and his cloth, it's thought that when Gopal Bhatta Goswami found one of the Shilas, Shalagram Shilas that he had manifested into the Radharaman deity. He's called Radharaman, although he's just Krishna. He's called Radharaman. That this was Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, Radha and Krishna combined. So Radharaman is Radha and Krishna somehow combined, but they put her crown there as well. There's another temple somewhere not far nearby, with the Radharani there. Somehow they make a connection. I'm not sure about that, but we look at it like this: that this is the way in which Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, even more prominently, fulfilled his promise to Gopal Bhatta Goswami that you go to Vrindavan and serve there, and then I will come again. He came in the form of Radharaman. Radharaman ji ki jai.
Thank you very much.
I mean, we call the deities Govinda, Gopinath. He's called Radharaman. he's not called Raman. He's called Radharaman. So both are there in him. He's Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. What else?
Okay,
Anything
the next
else
question.
this morning?
Yeah, there's a couple more questions. The next one is from Gaia.
Okay.
Hare Krishna Guraj.
Haribol.
I apologize if there is a lot of noise in the background. I'm in a car. So I'll make it quick. I was wondering about Lord Jagannath and Lord Baladev and Lady Subhadra. And I've heard the story how Lord Jagannath took his form, but I don't understand why Lord Baladev and Lady Subhadra also took that form. Could you please explain?
Well, there are different explanations of that, but the one you're probably referring to is that while in Dwaraka, Krishna overheard some devotees speaking about Vrindavan, and perhaps the gopis' love for him in particular. And overhearing that, he was transported into the Vrindavan lila and underwent the sattvic bhavas, transformations of the body to an extreme. So that's Jagannath, right? That's probably the story that you're referring to. But why Balaram and why Subhadra? And the simple explanation of that is that Balaram looked at him, and then same thing happened to him, understanding what was happening to his brother. And Subhadra looked at the two of them, and the same thing happened to her. So it's a sequence there, right? But it's the same. It's all about Braj Bhav. And that coming in touch with the Dwarka Bhav, Pujapad Sridhar Maharaj called it a train wreck. The two conceptions, emotional conceptions, Vrindavan and Dwarka colliding, and there's collateral damage. That's the Lord Jagannath with his arms stuck in and his head swollen up and so forth. Balaram and Subhadra follow him as well. So hope that helps. Jai.
Yes, thank you very
Swami
much.
ki Jai.
Jai.
Haribol.
Hari Hari.
What else?
The next question is from Madhur Mandal from, I think, Brazil, right? Yeah.
Yes.
He says, do you have some insight into the pastime of the churning of the milk ocean? We've been reading in the Lagu Bhagavatamrita a verse that suggests that the Gopas and the Brajabasis are acting as suras and asuras in that pastime.
I never read that verse. I'll have to look that up today. That's Lagu Bhagavatamrita is an interesting book of Rupa Goswami. The import of the whole book is Krishna's Tu Bhagavan Swayam, that Krishna is the Supreme Personality of God. And he approaches it in a different way than it's approached in other texts. Virtues of Krishna as the original personality of God, and the virtues of his devotees in Vrindavan in particular. I've never read it thoroughly all the way through. I've always wanted to. So I'm not familiar with that particular verse. That's an interesting concept. That story is there in the, I believe, the 8th canto of the Bhagavatam, churning of the ocean of milk, which produced many wonderful things. It's actually a creation story, if you will. It kind of underscores in a broad sense the Bhagavatam's cosmological perspective, the details of which are played out in different ways poetically in different stories. So, but the cosmological argument, if you will, or perspective is consistent throughout the different stories, which are served to try to illustrate the point. It's obviously done in a different way than it's done in modern science and so forth. And it's obviously, obviously a metaphysical perspective. But all cosmological perspectives are metaphysical. There's none of them, they're not metaphysical. So it doesn't matter if it's a Big Bang or a steady state, which is the previous one, or a Big Bang or whatever it is. They're all metaphysical positions. At least we admit that ours is, and that's fine. We don't have a problem with that. Metaphysical, of course, means that it's not something that can be proved objectively through observable evidence, and is reduced to something that's just a logical, if you will, or observable reality. And those who want to move away from any metaphysical position find that non-metaphysical perspective to be more rational and reasonable. Of course, our whole position is that reason is very limited, and the world doesn't work entirely from a reasonable perspective. From a rational perspective, if we were to give, we'd end up with less. But the fact is, we end up with more, and that's our experience. So the world is quite, it's bigger than what can fit between our ears, if you will. And that's good. That's good. We're comfortable with that. But anyway, I'm kind of going off in a different direction, but that's, basically what the story is. The idea that there are gopis and gopas that take the position of suras and asuras, in that's a very interesting Gaudiya perspective of Rupa Goswami. I'll have to look into that. If you could send me a number of the verse, that will make it easier for me to look that up. And maybe if I read it, and I have Baladev's commentary on it as well, I'll be able to say more about that if I find something of interest. But that said, I in a broader sense, I think we look at all the different lilas, if you will, and avatars, expansions of Krishna. They're all coming from the Swami Bhagavan Krishna himself and the Vrindavan setting that he cannot be separated from. For there to be Krishna, Swami Bhagavan, there has to be Radha, there has to be Yashoda, there has to be Nanda, or Krishna can't be somebody's son, or Krishna he can't be somebody's lover. There has to be Sri Rama, or he can't be somebody's friend, which is who Swami Bhagavan is. He's a friend, he's the lover, he's the son, and so on. So as much as Krishna is the source of all avatars, his lila, the Braj Lila, is the source of all of the leelas. So there is a way that you can kind of trace out and connect all these extended leelas with the Braj Lila, and how there's ways in which they're sometimes played out in Braj itself, or thought about by the Braj devotees. So to give you a further example of what I'm speaking about, Krishna expands, excuse me, to Mathura and Dwarka. In Vrindavan, the cowherd boy that's most like him is Sri Ram. Krishna is the son of Nanda Maharaj and Yashoda, and Sri Ram is the son of Vrishabhanu Maharaj and Kartika. He's the older brother of Radharani. These are the two principal families, if you will, royal families of the cowherd community, right? So Sri Ram is like Krishna in a number of ways. And often in their yudavira, or their relishing of vira-rasa, when they wrestle with one another, Sri Ram will win, and then Krishna has to carry him on his shoulders, right? So this is the Braj Lila. But when Krishna expands to Mathura and Dwarka, who are the associates there, the principal associates? Well, they are expansions of just like he's an expansion, Dwarkesh Krishna is an expansion of Vrindavan Krishna, so the devotees are expanded there. So Sri Ram expands there as Garuda, and Garuda carries Krishna on his shoulders. Radharani appears there as Satyabhama, Chandravali as Rukmini, and so on and so forth. So in a similar way, you can trace out, there's a way that you can make, trace out, if you will, the other leelas. And here's an example perhaps also that you're speaking of, the creation leela of the churning of the ocean. Trace out its connection with the Braj leela, maybe Sanatan or Rupa Goswami and Bhagavad Gita is doing something along those lines. Again, and to put it in another way, whatever can be found through the adherence of Varnashram, whatever can be found through the adherence of Gyan, of yoga, mystic powers, for example, and other things, and so on, whatever can be found through, or gained through Vaidhi Bhakti, or for ordinary activities, charity and kindness to others and so forth. All these things can be found in Vrindavan and more. So they all have their origins there, and all the leelas have their origins there. So again, maybe Rupa Goswami is drawing out a connection like that, but I haven't seen that verse, so I'd have to look at it. Send me a note with the.
He actually sent it to me. Do you want me to read it? Just the verse?
Okay.
Okay, it's a short verse. I'll just read it real quick. It says, it's 1.5.3. It says, the flood of milk coming from trillions of cows created an ocean. In the form of Lord Ajita, Krishna churned this ocean with the cowherds who acted as demigods and demons.
Well, yeah, he's doing what I said. He's taking the idea that Vrindavan is, it's Goloka, it's the land of cows. It's surrounded by an ocean of milk. Milk means affection of the cows, coming from their udders, right? So something along those lines. I'll read Baladev Bhushan's commentary on it, if there is one, and say more after I read that if it's appropriate. Interesting. Okay, anything else?
I have one more question from Sevanidhi.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
Can't hear you.
So,
Sevanidhi,
can you hear me? No.
You do the English.
No.
Check interpretation. English. Mute.
Ah.
Okay, now.
Say something.
You hear me now, Guru Maharaj?
No.
Can you hear me?
I can't hear you.
No. English. Mute. It is
I've done.
okay.
Can you
I
hear me
you.
now, Guru Maharaj?
Yes, I can.
Okay. So my question is how they can, how if there the jealousy between the gopis, let's say like Radharani's Priyanarmasaka Subal, and then Chandravali's Priyanarmasaka, if this jealousy is reflecting in the relationship between the Priyanarmasakas, and in also like connected to this, I'd like to ask, Subal, is he Kamarupa or Sambandharupa?
So if I understand your question, you're asking that just as there is jealousy between Radharani and Chandravali, so because Radharani and Chandravali and the different gopi group leaders have Priyanarmasakas also connected with them. The Priyanarmasaka has a Yuteshwar and a Yuteshwari, means a Gopa group leader and a Gopi group leader. So just as Radharani is the Gopi Yuteshwari for Subal, for example, so Chandravali must be the Yuteshwari for some other Priyanarmasaka. And just as Chandravali and Radharani have jealousy for one another, is there some kind of competition between the respective Narmasakas. That's your question, right? First part of your question, right? Well, what I'll say to you about that is that
Yes.
is that the concept of the Priyanarmasaka is something that is given to the world by Rupa Goswami. No one else has done that. This is a unique contribution of his, and a view into the lila, these boys' participation, and the nature of their participation, and so forth. But he gives us a window into that reality, but it's entirely focused on Narmasakas who have Yuteshwaris who are favorable to Radharani service, or neutral at least, not to any opposition type of boys. So all of the boys that he mentions, what the reality, the greater reality is, he's not given us a picture into that. He's only shown us, so we are only interested in going on that side and so forth. He doesn't, there's no description of such friction between cowherd boys. Of course, there's no description of Chandravali having an Narmasaka who's got her as the group leader. The whole angle of vision given from Rupa Goswami is from this whole Radha-centric perspective, which is the actual reality of Vrindavan Leela. It is Radha-centric. So all of the boys have connection with that side. Are there others? There are all kinds of possibilities, but this is not presented to us, brought up to us to consider, or to be concerned about. It would seem theoretically that could be the case. We have, we know about Chandravali has her Sakis, right? Padma and so forth, and others. So, and they definitely participate in this competition, but there's no mention of any such Narmasakas or any such competition amongst the Narmasakas. So we don't entertain that. As far as the second part of your question, is Subal, Sambandhanuga, or Kamanuga, right? Kamarupa, Sambandharupa. Sambandharupa means the kind of love in Rag Bhakti that's either Sakhya, Vatsalya, or Dasya. Kamanuga means the gopis, Rag, and love for Krishna. So because Subal is involved, obviously, in the romantic affairs of Krishna, your question is he Kamanuga or Sambandhanuga, or is he Kamarupa, Sambandharupa? The difference, Anuga means to follow. So Sambandhanuga follows the Sambandharupa, Kamanuga follows the Kamarupa, right? But no, Subal is a Saka. He's a Saka. His involvement in the romantic life of Krishna is considerable. And it's a particular type of involvement called tadbhav. So it's not some vogue. So he doesn't care to enjoy Krishna for Krishna's pleasure romantically. That's not his perspective. But to assist Krishna in and Radharani in relishing romantic affairs between themselves. This is similar to, this is the same type of Madhurya Rasa that the Manjaris have, that it's called tadbhav, not sambhog. They don't want to have direct union with Krishna. They want to bring about the union of Radha and Krishna. And they militate against any direct union with Krishna with themselves. So the Narmasakas have the same type of Madhurya Bhav influence on their Sakhya Bhav. And that makes a difference then between them and the Manjaris, because the Manjaris have this Kamanuga Tadbhav, right? They are in Madhurya Rasa. and they are tasting a particular type of Madhurya Rasa called Tadbhav, which means to assist the leading lady, in this case Radha, in experiencing the bhav, right? Tadbhav. But they're in Madhurya Rasa. So that's called sakshat, direct. But then there's lesha, partial. Partial means that here in the case of the gopas that are narmasakas, that are engaged in the romantic life of Krishna and Radha, helping do the same thing that the manjaris do to bring them together, they're in Sakhya Bhav. They're not in Madhurya Bhav. So it's not direct, it's partial. They're in sakhya-rasa. And so they're in sakhya-rasa, they're attracted to the way in which Krishna responds to how he feels in regards to his love for Radharani. They want to participate in those feelings and assist him. And so, but they're in sakhya-rasa, whereas the manjaris are in Madhurya Rasa. So there's a difference. Sakshat and lesha. Lesha means partial. Partial because they're in sakhya-rasa. So that Madhurya Rasa influence, as I've said before, is like a drop of honey in the yogurt of their sakhya-rasa. It sweetens their sakhya-rasa. The very purpose of that is that attraction to Krishna's romantic life on their part is to enhance their sakhya-rasa. And it causes their sakhya-rasa to excel in excellence beyond the excellence and intimacy of the other sakhas in ways that are comparable to that of the gopis, tasting, for example, anurag, mahabhav. But they're purely in sakhya-rasa. It's a type of sakhya-rasa with if you wanted to compare it, to say to yogurt, and there's a drop of honey in it, something like that. So no, that's not kamanuga. That's not kamanuga. It's under the category of sambandhanuga, but it has a drop of kamanuga in it. I guess you could say kamarupa in it, a drop. But that drop enhances the sakhya. So it's a special kind of sakhya. Does that answer your question?
Yes, Guru Maharaj. Just like a follow-up thought. So Radharani is, or Subal is called Subala Nyasa Swarupa, something like that. So
Yeah.
my question is, like, that means that this is her Sambandha Rupa form. She also expands.
That's a way of talking about it. Raghunath Goswami gives that name. Radharani is she who dons the form of Subal. So what do you want to make out of that, of course, depends upon your bhav, if you have any, or your theological acumen, right? You can say, well, he's a Kaya Vyuha of Radharani in male form, something like that. Kaya Vyuha just means Kaya Vyuha. Vyuha means expansion, Kaya means body. Expansion of, so you can say it's when Radharani wants to taste Sakhya Bhav in eternity, that we call Subal, something like that. But it's Sakhya-rasa. Or then some will say, well, he just looks like Radharani. It means that's all. They don't want to go any further with it. But I've written a nice chapter about this, quite detail in my forthcoming book. Should be out soon. So now the devotees are.
Yeah, we're very eager. We're waiting for it.
Yeah, the index is being done, so that's will take a little while, but otherwise should be out soon. So. Okay, nice to talk with you all. Nice to see you all. Hope to be with you next week. Haribol.
Haribol. Just a quick announcement. Next Thursday, Brigupad is going to give his class on the sages of Naimisharanya. And we have a whole new lineup for May, which I'll send you guys an email soon. So check your inboxes. That's all.